Hello, Kilkenny. Hello, Kilkenny Libraries. And thank you so much for having me, first of all, in what is probably one of the more unusual things I've done in lockdown 2020 into lockdown 2021. Um, as I'm recording this for you in advance as part of all of these wonderful kind of little items and stuff that's being done by Kilkenny Libraries for the Ireland Reads campaign, it is February. And we're all still in lockdown. And I've in fact been sitting in this chair for the last 6 months alone and haven't really moved, to be honest with you, because where's the point in that? This is an unusual one. You might be able to tell slightly the nerves that I'm dealing with. And I mean nerves, because it's the first time ever I've been asked to pretty much talk about myself for a prolonged period of time. Now, if you've ever heard me being interviewed ever, you'll know that I'm capable of talking about myself at length, and I've done so on many occasions. That's usually done in the form, though, of a conversation you're having with someone else, where you're required to sit in one place and talk in front of a camera, seeing your own face, which I'm not good at the best of times, all about yourself and your life and your career and what it is you do in the book world for 30 minutes. It's unusual. I immediately said no, and then I went and thought about it, and I thought, okay, look, I'm not a great believer in not being able to do things. I'm a great believer in going, feck this, let's see how it works. So unfortunately, you're about to watch feck this and see what it works, and we'll see what we can do over the course of the next roughly 30 minutes or so. There are a bunch of things that my friends in Kilkenny Libraries would like me to talk to you about. I want to say thanks to them, firstly, because I did an event in Graignamanagh Library for them a fair few years back now at this point, and it was immensely enjoyable, and it was in front of a small group of people, and obviously I didn't put them off enough to have them never ask me to do anything ever again. So thank you very much to them before I get started. In case you have no idea who I am, how are you? It's nice to meet you. My name is Rick O'Shea. I am a presenter with RTE. I've been so for almost the last 20 years at this point. And the vast majority of that playing music on the radio, and then in the last couple of years being the presenter of the book show on RTE Radio 1. I do that amongst about 17 other jobs in the book world, all involving plate spinning, all at the same time, and some of which I'm going to talk to you about over the course of the next little while. They wanted me to start at the beginning, though, about my career, and maybe tell you a little bit about that. I'm always conscious that when people who work on radio talk about their radio careers, unless you're one of those very special people, unless you are the late Larry Gogan, rest him, unless you are Joe Duffy, unless you are Gay Byrne, odds are it's not going to be very interesting to people who don't work in radio. So I'm going to keep this relatively short. I had no interest in becoming a broadcaster when I was a kid. I liked watching TV, and I liked a little bit listening to the radio, although I just liked that because that was where the music came from. The actual thing itself, I cared less about. I was 15 and I entered a competition on the radio for a bunch of prizes. This was 1988, and it was for £50,000 in the old money of prizes. They weren't giving away cold hard cash. They were giving away £1,000 worth of video rentals from Extravision. Extravision was new in 1988. They were giving away the rental of a speedboat for a year, which is always my favorite. I think that was worth about 10 or 15,000 of the pounds. I came from Crumlin. We lived in Crumlin. We didn't have a driveway at the time. I have no idea where we were going to put a boat. I couldn't swim. Nonetheless, none of this stopped me entering the competition. It seemed like a good idea. It was the summer of 1988. I was 15. And I entered on the now long since gone Sunshine 101. And I auditioned in one of their phone audition things, which people do stuff live on the radio, and they did a phone audition thing. And they liked me. Probably didn't realize how old I was. They let me into their semi-final, which had 20 people that all came out and made little radio shows that we all did live on air. And I got into the final, and then I lost, because obviously you don't give a 15-year-old kid 50 grand's worth of stuff. That's a terrible idea. What are you talking about? It got me interested enough that something obviously started rattling around in the back of my head. And over the course of the next couple of years, I was still doing my leaving cert and still getting ready to do, I had no idea what, when I went to college. And I decided I wanted to do an arts degree in UCD, because that's what everybody does when they have no idea what they want to do in life. You do a good old-fashioned arts degree and pick some things you like, And I did English and history and philosophy. And I lasted a year. One of the many reasons that may have been that I walked into the student radio station on day one and said, "Hello, can I make a radio show, please?" To which they said, "Well, do you have any experience?" And I said, "Well, I've been on hospital radio for about the last 6 weeks. I'd started doing hospital radio in the summer between school and college." And they said, "You are the most experienced person we have. Come on in." And that was how it began. I spent quite a lot of time hanging around the student union. I did a lot of student radio. By the time I finished up at the end of year one, I was the program director of the student radio station, and I was programming everything. That may have been a pointer. I dropped out of year one in UCD. I instead went to what was then Senior College Ballyfermot and is now BCFE, and did a course in broadcasting and journalism. And during the course of that, I got myself a gig on the radio in the closest place I could to Dublin, which was in Wicklow, East Coast Radio in Bray. And I started doing a few shows for them. And then I did a few more shows for them. And then they offered me an actual job that involved me having to be there 6 nights a week. And I had a choice between going back to do my second year of broadcasting and journalism, or I could instead go and take a real job that paid almost no money, and in fact didn't pay enough money for the rent I would have to have in Bray. I, in what has become a strand of decisions that I've made in my life, foolishly made the decision and went, "Fine, I'm going to have a crack at this." And so I did. And it started from there. And I ended up in local radio there for a while, local radio in Wexford for another little while as well. Hello, Wexford, anybody who's watching from there. And then I was offered a job in the now long since gone Atlantic 252. You may not remember Atlantic 252. It broadcast from Trim in County Meath. It broadcast very loud pop music on long wave when long wave was still a thing. And I'm talking about the mid-1990s here. I'm not talking about 1964. And I had a job there for about 18 months. And got offered a job in Dublin after that. Worked in Dublin very happily for 5.5 years in FM 104, which is still there. And then in 2001, I got offered a job in RTE in 2FM. It was a very easy decision because I was unemployed at the time. I'd just been fired from my last job and I was 6 months unemployed. Luckily, it's the only 6 months I've ever been unemployed in my life. Touch table. And I've been there since the summer of 2001. I was with RTE 2FM for about 17 of those years and enjoyed it immensely. There does come a point when you're a man in your mid-40s that you realize you can't continue to play pop music to incredibly young people, and it's possibly best to do something else. So 2 things happened. I ended up presenting on RTE Gold, which is where I am now, weekday mornings from 10. And I managed to get myself another job in arts programming. This is part of another story that I'm going to tell you in a little while. So this brings us up to roughly about kind of maybe, I'm going to scroll back slightly, let's say to 2015. So in and around 2015, I was one of those people who'd spent my life reading. When I was a kid, read everything I could get my hands on, Famous Five books, Secret Seven, Three Investigators, anything that was available was cheap. I could get when I was going on my holidays. I read a lot of comic books. I had an enormous collection of those at one point. And when I was about, I still think I was about 9 because I've done the maths back in my head. I was in a prefab class in my school in Drumnacastle. And I went back, and one of the very first days we were allowed to go back and take some books from the library. The library was a bookshelf that was probably about half the size of the one you see here at the back of a prefab. One of the books that was there was a collection of short stories by the late, great Arthur C. Clarke. And I read it. And the first story in it is called The 9 Billion Names of God. And I was hooked. And I developed a lifelong love of reading science fiction. I read everything of his I could get my hands on. I still have quite a lot of them upstairs in shelves here, my old editions that probably haven't been read since I was a teenager. And that became my way into adult fiction, which was relatively early, I think. I went to libraries, I went to bookshops, I spent a lot of time in Eason's and O'Connell Street in Dublin. That was our regular Saturday afternoon, was into Eason's and O'Connell Street. And that was my life. I'd done a little bit of English in college. I'd spent the rest of my time reading, but I was one of those people who had found himself in his mid-30s, early mid-30s, where am I doing my maths back? 2015, late mid-30s, early 40s. Yowzers, let's not get ahead of ourselves here. Sorry, that's only 6 years ago. Early 40s. I would love to read more. I would love to have been able to have read a lot more. And every time I found myself going into a bookshop with large selections, and part of that was going into places like Hodges Figgis in Dublin, places like Dubray, and part of it was going into bookstores, which I used to do quite a lot in foreign cities. Anytime I visited somewhere, I'd always try and find either the big local bookshop or the big secondhand bookshop that had a big English language section. I would get palpitations because I realized there were so many incredible books coming out every year, and I wasn't getting to read enough of them. I was probably reading maybe 20 books a year, maybe a little bit more. So I made a decision in, I think, 2015. You think you should look up the stats for things like this before you open your mouth and you're 10 minutes into a conversation. I think it was about 2015. I decided I was going to read 100 books that year. Starting in January, it was going to be my big thing. Now, for a lot of people, that's not a big deal. I know a lot of people who managed to read a dozen books a month without breaking a sweat. But for me, that was a very big deal at that stage. I thought the only way I can keep myself honest is by saying this out loud. I wrote a blog post about it. I had a blog at the time. I mentioned it on social media, and I thought that's probably going to be the end of it. It wasn't. It was picked up by a couple of people I knew. I was asked would I write an article about it for a newspaper, which I did. And then I was asked would I come on to a Radio 1 show and talk about it, which I did. And then it kind of snowballed and it became a thing. So I found myself throughout the course of the year talking on social media about the books that I was reading. Part of the process that led to was then people saying to me, would you not, consider starting a book club? We can all read books together. It was at that moment, I think, where people still weren't as wary of social media as they are now. And I think they believed in the power of good, as I still do when it comes to certain things in social media. I wasn't really that interested in starting a book club. I was never part of a book club. I'm never very good at those kind of things. But I thought I can start something online and it could be interesting and it could be fun. The easiest way for me to do it was to set up a Facebook group, so I did. And the Facebook group, the Ricochet Book Club, because I couldn't come up with a better name at the time, started in 2015. And I thought, if we're very lucky here, I will end up with a couple of hundred people who are seriously interested in books. This might roll on for a little while. It might have enough momentum to keep it going. Who knows? Maybe it will, maybe it won't. And I thought that will be fun. Maybe. Let's see where it goes. It developed a momentum very, very quickly for a number of reasons. I don't think I realized the amount of people in Ireland and elsewhere in the world who didn't really have friends, family, or people close to them to talk to about their love of books. For a lot of people, they're lucky enough. Maybe they do have a group of friends that they do that with. Maybe they have a book club. Maybe they're involved in one in their local library. For a lot of people, whether it's for reasons of they just don't know those people, they don't hang around with people who are like that, whether it's, and quite a lot of the time, it's reasons of lack of physical proximity. So people who live somewhere quite isolated or possibly quite rural, they found the book club and they started talking and talking and talking. And then it snowballed with people recommending it to other people, to other people, to other people, which is the only way these things will ever work. As a result of which, I ended up with 1,000 people, and then a couple of thousand people, and then 10,000 people. And as of now, we're just gone 35,000 members in one book club in one place on the internet, which to me is still a number I prefer not to think about. And we passed 35,000 quite recently, and maybe it's because of where we all are right now. I didn't even notice. It was just like that. It is in a place for extraordinary good. If you've never been, please do look it up. It's on Facebook. Just look up the Ricochet Book Club. I thought it would be me going in once a month, recommending a book of the month, and then saying we'll all come back at the end of the month and talk about it. Instead, I am thrilled that I am the least part of the book club. The book club is about dozens upon dozens upon dozens of people every day posting about books that they're reading, looking for advice, and looking for other people's opinions on things that they have read themselves, and then hundreds, if not thousands, of comments a week on all of those posts. It is a place that is warm and kind and happy and unlike anywhere else on the internet, and that's exactly how I'm going to keep it. So the book club becomes this place, this thing. As a result of that, then the momentum continues beyond the year where I was reading the 100 books. I read the 100 books. I finished them the day before New Year's Eve. And then it developed something else. Pardon. Because I knew I wasn't going to be able to speak for an entire 30 minutes without breaking pause. So I think it was in 2015. I think it was 2015, I was asked by my friends at the Bord Gáis Energy Theatre, would I be interested in doing a public interview? The public interview was with a playwright called Simon Stevens. Simon wrote the stage version of A Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. You may have read Mark Hatton's book. Simon was the playwright who then adapted it for the stage. And there was a very good version of it in the Bord Gáis around the time. I went to see the version in the West End around that time as well. It was really strange because I had spent quite a lot of my career in radio interviewing people. I interviewed people all the time. I interviewed people who were in bands. I interviewed people at press junkets. I interviewed people who were movie stars. I didn't interview authors because it wasn't part of my job and it wasn't part of my brief, and I didn't do arts interviews at all. I said, sure. And one night in Dibray, I interviewed Simon in front of a crowd of about 70, 80 people who turned up on that night. We all went to the pub afterwards and we all had fun. And that was the very first ever Ricochet Book Club real world live event. It then developed tentacles. So we started having events fairly regularly. And then I started being asked to do events at festivals all around the country. And then people from the book club started meeting up at those festivals around the country. And this kind of snowballs. It becomes a thing where you have a Christmas party every year. That was how I ended up doing pretty much what is over 50% of my job today, which is interviewing authors publicly at festivals, usually obviously in the real world with a room full of people, and certainly over the last 12 months doing it virtually for festivals. And that's something that will continue into this year. It's not just that, because what happens is then, and they've asked me to talk about other aspects of the job as well, you end up finding yourself doing other things. I curate as well. If somebody had said to me 5 years ago, would you be able to curate an entire literary festival, I would have run away screaming. I found very quickly that that was something I very much liked the idea of. I had previously curated an event or two that I've been asked to be involved with in other festivals. And then a couple of years back, I was asked by the lovely people at the Waterford Writers Weekend, which is part of the Imagine Arts Festival down in Waterford, would I be interested in taking on the job of curator? I had a meeting with them. They were lovely. I was terrified, as I am about every new job I take on, particularly when it's in a field that I haven't been involved in before. And I said yes. So I had to curate a 3-day festival. I think we ended up curating about 23, 24 events over 3 days. And I did that for 2 years in Waterford. They were some of the longest jobs I ever took on, because curating a festival like that can take the bones of 8 months to put together all of the authors that you're looking for, whether they are local authors, whether they are authors that you're bringing in from the UK, as we did on a couple of occasions, people from all around the country. And it was a very steep learning curve, and one that I like to think that I brought something different to in year 2 than I did in year 1. But by the time I reached the end of the second year and I was asked to do it again, I said, thanks, no. The exhaustion has gotten to me and I think I'm going to hold off on this. Then, about a year and a half later, somebody else asked me, would you like to curate something else? And I had a lovely conversation with my friends at the UCD Festival, which is run by the UCD Alumni Office. They have a festival every year. Usually it's brilliant. I did an event for them one year. It's held in the open air. There's about 120, 130 events that are run in Belfield on a single day by all of the faculties. They're all very different. And the arts faculty then runs literary events. I was asked last year if I would be interested in curating the literary strand of the UCD Festival, which was 5, 6 events we did last year. It's relatively small scale. And I said, yes, thank you very much. That sounds like fun. And we had everything ready and prepared and ready to go. And then COVID hit. And we moved everything online. And we ran all of our events online in 2020. And we'll be doing the same in 2021 as well for the UCD Festival that's coming up for this year as well. So curation gigs are some of the hardest ones. It involves you trying to figure out who you would like to have as part of your festival, what interesting things you think they can say, who will make a good interviewer to go with that. Frequently, how much fun is there in putting lots of different people together on panels and seeing what comes of that. And that, in and of itself, is what makes doing a job like that a joy. And I enjoy them immensely. The presenting jobs I miss. I cannot tell you how much I miss sitting in a room full of people. It doesn't matter whether it's 15 people, I've done those, or whether it's 1,500 people, I've done those as well. Those are some of the best things about the job that I do these days. I miss them immensely, but they will be back, and possibly even be back by the end of this year. In theory, I've been booked for one in November that's going to be happening in the real world, and it will be a joy when that happens, when that occurs. That's another part of the job. The other strand that people seem to find interesting, and probably rightly so as well, is the judging bit. I've judged a few literary festivals over the last few years, and they're really wonderful and interesting. First one was the Bookseller, the magazine in the UK. They ran a YA book award, I think in 15 or 16, in and around then. And I was the only Irish person involved because the Bookseller is a magazine in the UK. So strangely, I never got to meet anybody who was on the panel with me physically in the real world. We held our judging meetings remotely. They all sat in one room with me as a giant head on a screen. And I was sitting in front of my laptop in RTE. It was a lovely experience. I got to read some great books that I wouldn't otherwise have read. And that led to, I think it was last year, it was about 2 weeks ago. Last year was the Costa Book Awards. They're one of the bigger award ceremonies in British books. They've been around for a very long time. They're quite prestigious. And I was asked a couple of years ago if I would be one of the judges. I was judging the children's category. And at the same time, I was being one of the judges that was put forward for the Book of the Year as well. So it involved a couple of meetings in the UK, back when you used to be able to do things like that. You used to just go back and forth on a plane to talk to people about books. And then it involved being there on the day and on the night for the ceremony as well. The Costa is one of those wonderful ones that decisions are made beforehand about their individual categories. There are 5 individual categories, and the 5 winners of that go forward for Book of the Year. You have a judging panel of, I think it's 9 that goes forward. I'm trying to remember who was on my judging panel, but a judging panel of about 9. And you go on the day. So you fly over on the morning, and then everybody's locked in a room until you come up with a decision. And then 2 hours later, the award ceremony is held and the winner is announced publicly. It is immense fun. I can't pretend it's not. It is also the most hard work that my job ever entails. I think that year I read 50 novels for the first category I was in, and another 5 for the second one. So it was interesting and hard going. I was one of the, I did my first chairing job last year in 2020 as well. Also strange because we never met in the same room and there was no actual ceremony. It was all virtual, and it was for the inaugural year of the Dalkey Literary Awards, which are coming back again in 2021. That was again interesting and again very strange because it involved not meeting the people who you were judging, and in fact not even meeting the person who won the awards. The award winner was Sinead Gleeson. She won for Constellations, although we did it via laptop like this, not telling her. If you can go and have a chance to have a look back at the footage, please do, because it was immense fun. Because she thought I was interviewing her about the process, and I instead went, "No, you've just won." And she had won a €10,000 prize, and it was wonderful to see the response on her face. Even better that I only live about 2 miles away from where she lives, and that I got to go over and drop it on her doorstep and wave from the bottom of the garden. The other things that I've been asked to talk about, and what's the joy of doing this, is I realize now I've been talking for 25 minutes, and I was terrified I wouldn't be able to talk about myself for 25 minutes. Turns out I can do this for much longer than that. A couple of other things they asked me to talk about. If you are in the Ricochet Book Club, books people are talking about, there's no pattern. It's one of those things I love about it. People will buy books and read books that maybe aren't being gabbed about in news press. They're not the sort of things you see being talked about elsewhere, but they develop this almost viral quality in the book club. Recently, it's been books like There in the Grief is a Ghost in the Throat, every book Liz Nugent has ever written, When All Is Said, all of Donald's books, My Dark Vanessa, American Dirt. They were big books last year, but they have a kind of viral quality about them. And it's one of those things that makes the book club a joy in and of itself, is trying to figure out why certain books become such a big deal there. It's well worth looking at. In terms of reading myself, and I'm going to show you some books that I think you might like in 2021. They did ask me to finish off with that. Balancing is hard. Reading used to be something I did for fun. I picked up things that I like the look of and I read them. These days, a huge chunk of the job involves reading. Thankfully, it's not an enormous, it's about half of my reading. Okay, let's be fair. Whether it's doing interviews with somebody and you have to have read the book in advance. I do a lot of reading for the work I do at Eason's these days. Myself and Sinead Moriarty pick out the Eason must-reads 4 times a year. We do spring, summer, autumn, and winter, and each of us picks 4 books that we think people will love. So there's a lot of reading that goes into that. But that's a joy as well, in that it then allows you to take books that you really love and put it in front of people in that way. But what I've tried to do, what I'm trying is to balance out one book for work, one book for me, one book for work, one book for me. And I don't want to make the workbooks sound as if they're not a joy, because they frequently are. And frequently I end up reading things I might not necessarily have chosen for myself, and they turn out to be fantastic anyway. So I'm trying. It is not the easiest thing in the world, and frequently books get bought by me. I'm the same as everybody else. I have a giant to be read pile, shelves of them next door, and I might get to them, next month. Frequently it's next year. It could be 2 years from now, but I will get to those books eventually, usually, if I've gone and paid my own cold hard cash for them. They wanted me to talk a little bit about authors I've interviewed in the past as well. That's always a joy. I've interviewed every major Irish author, from Anne Enright to Kevin Barry, Sally Rooney, Donal Ryan, Joe O'Connor. Pretty much everybody who's there, I've done at one point or another, almost. There's a couple I'm still missing. It's like a bingo card. I want to get them notched off, but I'm not going to tell you who they are. Physical ones that I remember, frequently it's about somebody who's not around very often, and then about the location and about the night and about the audience. Michael Chabon was one of those people. I've interviewed Michael twice. The first time it was on Bloomsday, and it was for part of the Bloomsday Festival. Michael knows his Joyce, and I was interviewing him with his wife, Isla Waldman, and we did that in Dublin in front of a full house full of people, and that was a fairly extraordinary, lovely night. Marion Keyes. I've rarely seen people love an author as much as Marion Keyes' audience loves Marion. I interviewed her in the Seamus Heaney home place in Balahi in County Antrim, the wonderful Seamus Heaney home place, which, if you ever get a chance to visit, is worth going very, very far out of your way for. It was also the place where I did my last physical interview in front of an audience, and that was at the tail end of February 2020. We are coming up on a year as I speak to you now, since the last time I've interviewed someone in public, which for me, that was with Martin Parr, the photographer. It's the first time I've interviewed somebody solely in the art world. And I love Martin Parr's work, and it was an absolute joy to get to talk to him up in the Seamus Heaney home place. Then lockdown 2021 came along, and shelf analysis came along. I realized that I wasn't going to get to do public interviews for quite a long period of time. So I thought, let's start something online. And everybody was doing it. I mean, every chat show was doing it. Graham Norton was doing it. The Late Late Show was doing it. They still do, interviewing people on Skype. And I thought, well, if it's good enough for them, it's good enough for me. So there are about 60 episodes of shelf analysis from last year. It started off very regularly, and then it became 3 times a week, then twice a week, and then once a week as the workload got heavier and heavier towards the end of the year. It was only when I went back to look today at some of the people that I interviewed throughout the course of it, and they're some of the biggest names that I've ever interviewed. They were wonderful because for a lot of people, I think they were feeling the lockdown as well, and they might not necessarily have been asked to do a lot of things. And for a lot of them, they weren't talking about current books. Shelf analysis, the idea was that they would talk about books that they loved and that they thought you should love as well. Neil Gaiman is there. Graham Norton is there, who I've had the joy to interview, I think, 5 times now at this stage. John Irving, Douglas Kennedy, Bernardine Evaristo, Sebastian Barry, John Banville, Elizabeth Day, Emily Pine, Max Porter, Maggie O'Farrell, David Mitchell, not that David Mitchell, the other David Mitchell. If you get a chance to have a look at them, they're on Shelf Analysis on YouTube. Just look it up and you'll find details of it there. Finally, just to finish off, things I have read in 2021 and things you might like as well. I was asked to do a little bit of this. I'm going to do a few, and I have them with me. Starting with books that I've read already that I think you're going to like as well. This is Kieran McMenamin. It is his second book. It's called The Sunken Road. It's half set in Fermanagh and it's half set in World War I in 1920 and 1921. It's a cracker. I think you might like it. I've also put somewhere to throw stuff, so that's helpful. This I read almost a year ago, and it's one of those books that was supposed to be out in 2020 and got bumped to 2021. Conor O'Callaghan, his second book as well. It's called We're Not in the World. It is the story of a father driving a truck through France with his daughter smuggled in the back and how they came to be there. It is a work of beauty and it's extraordinary. This is the new one from Kazuo Ishiguro. It's called Clara and the Sun. It's his first book since he won the Nobel. I can't tell you a lot about it other than to say it involves artificial intelligence and it made me cry at the end. You weren't expecting that, were you? Ronan Hession has a second book out this year as well. He is the author of Leonard and Hungry Paul, which is the Dublin one book this year. This is Panenka, his second book. Ronan writes these books that are just full of the most wonderful, warm, gorgeous, fantastic characters who are human like the rest of us. And his stuff is always a joy to read, and it's always like a comfort blanket for me anyway. That's Ronan's book that's coming out this year. Stuff that I haven't read. This arrived today. Bless it. Anne Griffin, the author of When All Is Said, the wonderful When All Is Said. Listening Still is her second book that's out this year as well. I'm going to enjoy that. We've got two here. Hang on, I'm going to do this one first, then this one. These two, I'm doing an event with both of them, so therefore this is definitely going to get read. They were on the to be read pile anyway. This is Louise Kennedy's collection of short stories, The End of the World is Cul-de-sac. It's a brilliant title, even if you weren't going to read it anyway. Great reviews for Una Mannion's Crooked Tree as well. That's also just out. This arrived the other day. I love Sarah Winman. I loved her last book, Tin Man, which was tiny. It was short and brief and beautiful. This is her new one. It's called Still Life. It is not short and brief. I'm absolutely sure it's going to be beautiful. I'm going to give a mention to this because it was one of our January books in the Ricochet Book Club and people are raving about it. You might know Will Dean. Sorry, there you go. Will Dean. Will Dean is the author of the Tuva Mudison trilogy already. Will is English, but he lives in the middle of a forest in Sweden. This is called Last Thing to Burn. It's Will's new book, which is coming out. Lots of raves for Danielle McLaughlin's novel, The Art of Falling, which is due out as well. Lisa Harding has a second book out this year as well. She's also Irish and wonderful. It's called Bright Burning Things. Loved her first book. And the final Lisa McInerney's trilogy, The Rules of Revelation. Again, if you haven't read any of the first two books, first go read those, then come back and read this. Two more. Do I have time? I have 2 minutes. This, I love the idea of, her name is Oana Aristide. This is new from her. She is a debut novelist, and this is called Under the Blue. It's a little bit science fiction-y. It's a little bit speculative fiction-y. There's a lot of that knocking around. And then I thought today, there's a pile of posts came in, and I thought maybe if there's be something small in here I might love. Something a little that might just be fun. And then, yes, it arrived. It is The Penguin Book of Feminist Writing by Hannah Dawson, which I had specifically asked for and which I've been looking forward to. And it's going to take a while. That's me recommending a bunch of things that I like the look of. Thank you so much for paying attention. The book show will be back in March on RTE Radio 1 as well. We'll be back running all the way up through until the summer. If you haven't had a chance to have a listen to me doing the book show, this will be year 3 of the book show on Radio 1. You'll find all the podcasts if you just look up RTE Radio Book Show wherever you get your podcasts, and you'll be able to check out the previous shows that we've made over the course of the last couple of years, but a new series is coming up. And other than that, this has been part of the Ireland Reads campaign, which I've been absolutely thrilled to be an ambassador for. I always like being asked to just do stuff for things like this, particularly when it's something that's so close to my own heart. So thank you to them for involving me. And other than that, I think that's it. I think I'm 4 minutes over. I'm so sorry to my friends in Kilkenny. Apologies. But again, thanks a million for having me. And thanks for watching.